Welcome back to my discussion of A Nation at Risk. I'm Dr. Deborah Owens, and in the second part of my series, I'll share with you the research that culminated in this very impactful report. And perhaps you'll agree with me that the findings of the National Commission on Excellence in Education were based on what many researchers would find to be incomplete and maybe even invalid research. The National Commission on Excellence in Education, NCEE, asked Secretary Bell for and was granted full autonomy in their work analyzing the state of education in the United States. He also pledged the full support and resources from the Department of Education and unlimited access to the department's data. The commission met for the first time in early October 1981. For the next 18 months, they held hearings across the country and considered evidence that would help them formulate an opinion about the status of education in America. Information learned at these hearings provided evidence of the Commission's findings. However, the question is, what empirical data was used by the NCEE in their evaluation of schools in America? In the current era of data-driven decision-making in education and a focus on testing data, this is a fair question. Since 1969, the state of public education has been measured by the National Assessment of Educational Progress, otherwise known as NAEP. For many years, statistics derived from NAEP have been the source of alarming headlines decrying the failure of public schools. Understanding the NAEP testing program is essential when considering the data they provide as a means of assessing the state of schools in America and judging the validity of claims that the schools are failing. For more information about NAEP, you may want to check out my two-part video in which I explain this highly consequential and controversial national assessment program. At the time when the NCEE was conducting its extensive evaluation of America's schools, NAEP data had been available since 1969, and therefore it would seem that this data could provide important information when judging the health of American schools at that time. However, no mention of NAEP data appears in A Nation at Risk. According to Terrell Bell, NAEP data was inconsistent, with some states participating and others refusing. Of the states that did participate, some left it up to the local school districts to make decisions about whether or not to participate in the testing program. Therefore, the NAEP testing program prior to 1983 did not provide the type of data that could be used to assess teachers or the state of public education in America. It's hard today to imagine a country in which standardized test scores of elementary and high school students were not the driving force behind education policy decisions. However, in the years prior to 1983, standardized testing was actually de-emphasized and certainly was not universal in its use across the country. In his memoir, Terrell Bell described the lack of data to determine student achievement through test scores in 1983. He stated, putting together accurate assessments of each state's educational standing proved to be much more complex and controversial than I had anticipated. Gathering academic achievement test scores state by state turned out to be an utter impossibility. Prior to 1983, and in particular during the years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision, the impetus for reforming education was addressing the disparities associated with racial segregation and unequal access to quality education. Arguably, during the years of resistance to federal desegregation laws, there was little desire to administer standardized tests to all students across the country if the end result would be to demonstrate the vastly unequal educational experiences of white middle-class students and minority students. Without an adequate, reliable, and valid storehouse of data for public schools to use in their analysis of the state of education in 1983, the Commission for Excellence in Education was left with only one means of examining student achievement empirically. The Scholastic Aptitude Test, the SAT, was first administered to American students in 1926, and therefore the Commission had a longitudinal set of data to use in their examination of student achievement across decades. The SAT was normed in 1941 and therefore became a standardized test. A bell curve established the parameters of scoring at that time in order to ensure that few people would score at the extreme top or bottom, and most would score in the mid-range. An important point in the standardization of the SAT is that the population used to establish scoring ranges in 1941 was 10,654 students from the northeastern region of the United States. These students were overwhelmingly white, 98%, male, 61%, and many attended private college preparatory high schools, 41%. In other words, they were elite. In the years prior to the NCEE's examination of public schools, there had been a consistent drop in SAT scores since 1963. Public school critics jumped on these reports to solidify their position that the public schools were failing to meet the needs of America's school children. Well, in 1975, the College Board established a blue ribbon panel to examine the decline in SAT scores, and after an exhaustive analysis, published their findings in 1977. The panel concluded that declines in SAT scores were due to three factors: a dramatic increase in the population of school-aged children in America as a result of the post-World War II baby boom, efforts to reduce the dropout rate, and efforts to eliminate discrimination and provide educational equity for all Americans. The panel further found that 25 years earlier, in the early 1950s, only one half of all Americans completed the 12th grade. By 1970, however, 3/4 of all Americans were completing 12th grade, with almost half of those students going to college. The College Board panel suggested that the decline in SAT scores at that time may reflect the nation's tardy legislative decision to attack previous discrimination based on race, sex, and family income. Interestingly, the College Board panel did not cite public school teachers, teacher quality, or administrators as a primary reason for the decline in SAT scores. The only thing they cited was a sharp increase in the demand for teachers because of the large influx of students during the 1960s and early 70s that resulted in a greater reliance on substitute teachers and less experienced teachers. After the publication of A Nation at Risk, William W. Turnbull, who served as the president of the Educational Testing Services, the agency responsible for the administration of the SAT, completed his own analysis of the decline of SAT scores. In 1985, Turnbull stated, "The SATs are neither specific nor sufficient measures of school effectiveness." Not mentioned by the College Board panel or Turnbull, however, is the fact that by 1977, a large number of states had turned to the American College Testing Program, the ACT, which began in 1959, as the test that would be used to indicate academic success and serve as the gatekeeper for entrance into university. This fact alone may have explained, at least in part, some of the decline in the SAT scores overall, as more students began taking the ACT and not the SAT. Nonetheless, the National Commission on Educational Excellence relied on SAT data to determine the state of education in the United States. The NCEE also utilized various other sources to gather information for their report. They commissioned experts to write papers on various educational topics. They invited administrators, teachers, students, representatives of professional and public groups, business leaders, public officials, and scholars to testify at 8 meetings of the full commission. They held 6 public hearings, 2 panel discussions, a symposium, and a series of meetings organized by the Department of Education's regional offices. They also considered letters from concerned parents, teachers, and administrators who volunteered extensive comments on problems and possibilities in American education, and received descriptions of notable programs and promising approaches in education. The commission's work took 18 months to complete. Every few weeks, the commission would gather together to conduct their work at various locations. The analytical data that resulted from the NCEE's 18-month investigation in the state of education, therefore, was vast. After 18 months of investigation and analysis, the NCEE completed its initial report. It was 225 pages in length. Some commission members were concerned that the lengthy report would be relegated to the fate of so many governmental documents that end up being merely archived among the thousands of reports generated over the decades. In 1988, in an interview, NCEE Chair David Gardner provided the rationale for revising the initial lengthy report. According to Gardner, the original 225-page draft was boring. It read like a master's thesis and put him immediately to sleep after the first few pages. Several other commissioners had a similar reaction, and the decision was made to radically change the entire character of the report. While the commissioner's original charge was to write a report to the government, they decided that the impact of their work would be greater if they approached the project in a much different way. According to Gardner, he told members of the commission, "Look, we're asked to make a report to the government. What we really want to do is write an open letter to the American people, because we need their understanding, we need their support, we need their involvement. And moreover, it will change the whole character of the report. We'll write it in plain English. It'll be brief. It'll be to the point." The final report would be shortened to a mere 36 pages, plus appendices, and would bear the name, "A Nation at Risk, the Imperative for Educational Reform, an Open Letter to the American People, a Report to the Nation and the Secretary of Education." In part 3 of my series on A Nation at Risk, I'll discuss the findings and recommendations found in the document and how the National Commission on Excellence in Education went about creating their blockbuster report, sure to get the attention of the American public, by using incendiary language and basically declaring war on our education system. I'll also share with you what we learned about the dubious report's content decades later from commission members that would confirm skeptical researchers' persistent questions about the validity of a nation at risk. What would happen when President Reagan unveiled the report, and why would some NCEE members be dismayed during the president's speech to share their masterpiece with the American public?